encourage you to bring it out of the woodwork now. And what I'm going to invite us to do is just to light a little candle. I try to find ways to make our experience together embodied rather than just virtual, and the smell of a match that is lit always helps me remember that we are physical beings in a physical world as well as being digitally connected. So if you have your candle, you may light it now. Thank you, Casey. I appreciate you. Wonderful. So as we light our candles, we settle in, I'm going to invite us to just take 3 deep breaths, have a little stretch, remind yourself, that it is in fact a Tuesday, and you are in fact alive, despite so many of the challenges that we're living within. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, just to rest them and take a deep breath in, just to let go of whatever you've just come from. Leaving that behind, knowing you can come back to it in just a minute. And then a second breath to arrive here in this Zoom room with 150 other people passionate about Jewish education. And then a final breath to find your intention for this time together. Maybe of openness or learning, curiosity. Breathing in with that intention. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So, the purpose for today's workshop is to try and push some of the boundaries that we might have, thinking about new insights that we can discover, new inspiration that might provide pathways for the strategy in the work that we do. I know you are all deeply skilled, passionate, faithful people. So I am not here to try and change any of that. What I am here to do is to share a little bit of how I think about what's happening, and to invite you to try that on, to see how that fits with your experience, whether it helps make things clearer. And if it does, to then think about, well, what does that mean? Where might we go? What new solutions might there be? So I invite you to try that on. You can always take it off at the end of the session, go right back to what you're doing. But for this time together, let's see if we can explore something new. So as I do that, I'm going to share my screen and we will start. There we go. Dun, dun, dun. So the core theme that I want to explore with you today is this way of thinking called unbundling and remixing. And for me, it is the most compelling way to think about what's happening in our religious and spiritual lives in the United States today. What I mean by that is this. Imagine just a few decades ago that you were on a bus, maybe on a subway, maybe waiting at a train station, and everyone had in their hands a newspaper. And I would like you to think, if you will, and you can put these in the chat, why were these people reading a newspaper? Just feel free to put all of the answers that come to mind right in the chat. Why would people read the newspaper? To avoid eye contact. I love it, Valerie. You're not the only one who thought that. So they wouldn't have to talk to others. Wow, I have found my people. This is wonderful. Right, Rachel, thank you. To be updated with the news or to pass the time. Read the funnies, Arnie, exactly. Abby says to find out what's going on beyond them. Information, Sam. Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of stuff around, yeah, just wanting to know what's going on, the news. We've got some puzzles, some crosswords, Sarah, exactly. So there's all sorts of different reasons. Danny, yes, because there was no Instagram. That is indeed correct. So there's a couple of different reasons that we're seeing in here. The news being the most important one, obviously. But there were other things. People would find the latest scores around sports. People would look for movie show times, weather, personal ads, crossword puzzles, travel inspiration, maybe to learn about local real estate, and of course the funnies. Today, that landscape looks very, very different. right? Everything is personalized into an app. And if you want to find exactly the things that you're interested in, you don't have to look through the beauty section or the travel section to get to the real estate. You can just download Zillow and spend hours of your life scrolling through properties that you can't afford. Or is that just me? But you can essentially choose, you can unbundle exactly the kind of value that you're interested in. You don't have to take the whole package, right? You just get the apps that you're interested in receiving. So the media business went through an intense crisis, right? The newspaper industry really struggled as we went online. No longer did people, and I will stop sharing my screen so I can see all, no longer did people want to just read the news. They were just looking for news that was specific to them. Maybe they wanted to find only the information or the movie showings or whatever it was that was applicable to them. So things became more and more personalized. So as that happened, things become more unique, more custom made, less and less is shared with others. And so as I think about what's happening in terms of our religious landscape, I see the same theme of personalization, of customization, of wanting things to be tailored just for me. And just like the media industry went through a crisis, I think we're in a similar situation with religious life. Now, the key argument that I want to make today is that this move of unbundling doesn't mean necessarily that the practices or the stories or the wisdom teachings or the traditions that we love are obsolete. It is the distribution system that is no longer fit for purpose, right? The longing is just as strong as it ever was. The same is true with the music industry, right? So the distribution system has become obsolete, but the longing was as strong as ever. If you think back to CD sales, right? Or even before that, records, we have the same pattern. An industry that was very stable, that encountered new technology and encountered a new moment, and it went into crisis. Because we used to bundle together music into one object, into a CD or into a record, just like we bundled news and cartoons and movie showings into a newspaper. But what new technologies have allowed us to do is to unbundle those into a different product. Here is a recent screen grab of my Spotify. And yes, I do very much enjoy the Little Shop of Horrors and Broadway more generally. So you can no longer do you have to buy the whole album, you can just buy a specific track, right? That is the major technological innovation that led to the streaming service. And so again, the music industry went through this total crisis of how do we stay profitable when our core product is no longer desired. Now, the good news is that both the news industry and the music industry are now more profitable than ever. The New York Times has more subscribers than it's ever had, right? Music industry is booming generally, but they figured out a new economy to make that work. They had to re-figure out what the strategy of distribution was to make the thing that we wanted fit within a business model. So as we pay for individual tracks and we subscribe to our own music, it's not something that we now own, it's something that we access. So we've moved from an ownership economy to an access economy. And these are the kind of patterns that I want us to pay attention to today, because I think very, very similar things are happening in the world of religious education, in the world of religious community. And so again, the distribution system became obsolete, but the longing was as strong as ever. So what does that look like in our context? What does it look like in religious and spiritual life in America today? More and more people are less and less traditionally religious, right? We all have seen the statistics. Generational shifts mean that now fewer than half of Americans attend a congregation. I got a really interesting statistic just in my text messages a few days ago from a good friend of mine who runs the Springtide Research Center. And if you're not aware of Springtide, do look them up. They don't look at the Jewish world specifically, but I think they're really helpful to understand what's happening with young people, religion, and the experience of community and loneliness more generally at a national level. And this is what he sent. This is from research that'll be released in April. Only 17% of young people who are religious, so these are young people who claim a religious identity, only 17% of young people who are religious say that a religious institution helps them discover their meaning in life. That is a pretty damning number. Now, my response to that is not that, oh, we've just, you know, that there's bad leadership or these programs aren't working. This is not about a failure of excellence or a failure of individual organizations. It represents an intense cultural and systemic shift in how young people are engaging meaning, community, and purpose. So I really want to stress, I'm not here to make anyone feel bad. I'm here to help us try and figure out what it is that we can do to meet this cultural shift. Because I assume that all of you here are absolutely excellent at what you do. Our job is to figure out how to do it in this new world. Does that make sense? Okay, I see Judy nodding. I appreciate that, Judy. So what does this look like in Jewish life today? Again, I hope you'll respond in the chat. If you think back to maybe a golden age of Jewish community, perhaps, of institutional Jewish community, why did people seek it out? What were they looking for? Why were they going to synagogue? Why were they coming to summer camp? Why were they engaging with all of the things that we know and love? Yes, exactly, Debbie. To meet friends, to be in community. Margot agreeing, absolutely. Shari, absolutely. Sense of safety, right? Not to be alone. To bring resources together. Belonging, Lily. A sense of community, Karen. Yes. Food, yeah, absolutely. Sharing traditions. Alison, again, chain of tradition, safety in numbers, shared values. Love that, Joan. Absolutely. So a sense of being part of something bigger than ourselves is absolutely central. Certain moments of life transition, Gloria, yes, burial, passing on traditions to children, Karen, exactly, education. Music, prayer, hope, yes, Renee, exactly. So again, what I'm trying to point us towards is the reasons that we have gathered in community in a spiritual or religious context is not purely one thing either. Holidays and life cycle rituals, exactly. In a Jewish context, we might think about connection to tradition, sense of peoplehood, wanting a place of moral formation. How do I become the kind of person that I want to be? Rites of passage, as you mentioned, but also things like singing together, celebrating, receiving wisdom teaching, a space to navigate grief and loss, coming together to make change in our local context and the world around us, economic support, contemplative time, witness and accompaniment during difficult times. These are all things that were bundled together into a religious institution. And what I'm hoping to point to is, just like the newspaper industry unbundled from one offering in a printed page to all sorts of different apps that did the job better, just like the album and the record has unbundled to individual tracks. What I think we're seeing is an unbundling of religious life that was organized within institutions to something which is accessed individually, right? So I don't necessarily care about basketball, but I'm really into baseball. I only want baseball scores, so I'm going to get the best baseball app. I might be really into, Niganim, but I'm not that into tech study. Sorry, everyone. That's actually not true for me. I love tech study. I'm totally obsessed. But right, that might describe someone. And so what they're doing is leaning into the thing that they want, but not wanting the rest of the pieces that fit together. We might feel a great sense of loss with that, right? There might be something that feels incomplete about these unbundled practices or these unbundled ways of engaging with community. And you're right. You're right, there is something that's lost. A sense of coherence, certainly the experience of community, a sense of how this fits within a longer tradition. But the reality is, as more and more people experience their religious and spiritual lives to be mixed, the less we can assume this kind of uniformity that came as part and parcel of an institutional design that was built for similarity. Right? In a Christian context, this is super true as well. You might have Catholic parishes dotted throughout the city. There was the Irish parish, the Italian parish, the Polish parish, and people shared food and a language even, as well as all of the kind of liturgical rituals that might be associated. And now, as people might grow up in mixed faith families, right? They might still go home for the High Holy Days, but really they find their sense of transcendence by going hiking, or they might meditate using the Headspace app. We're seeing people mix and piece together what their own kind of personal profile of religious and spiritual meaning making looks like. So if you think about one kind of little example, here might be the profile for one person. They love hiking, and so that's an experience in nature is where they feel a sense of transcendence, as well as going to a Beyonce concert, right? That sense of being lost in a crowd, of sharing something with lots of other people. They might use their Headspace app and access therapy through BetterHelp. They might lay tarot cards. Their partner might have grown up Hindu, and so there's some home-based rituals that they engage with which come from a Hindu context. They practice yoga, but they go home for the high holidays, or they're still really connected to the practice of Shabbat. More and more for this growing number, especially of younger people, this is what their spiritual lives look like. It's a mixed ecology. It's a mixed religious and spiritual life that draws from a place of multiplicity. Now, I saw in the chat a really good question, which is this not always true? And of course, and it's absolutely right. Now, we are living in an age where we are encountering difference much, much more and much, much more frequently. Exactly as Abby puts in the chat, this is the same trend that we're seeing in expressions of gender, racial identity. Multiplicity is the name of the game. In fact, in a world where we're more and more used to multiplicity, anything that really doubles down on singularity for this group of people feels suspect. And one of the things I've encountered a lot as I've worked with communities of young people, especially in Jewish context, a lot of people will say, I feel like I'm a bad Jew, right? That classic quote, or that sense of I'm not enough, or I don't speak Hebrew, or I don't fit into what they want from me. Now that may not be true. The they is this kind of imagined out there institutional perspective, which often is not at all representative of how I experience actual institutional leaders. But there's a perception in which unless I fit into a certain kind of box, I'm not good enough, or I don't belong properly, or I don't fit into what is being offered to me. So as we think about the experience of young people and how they're mixing together all of these unbundled realities to make the perfect personalized mix for themselves, what we're finding is that they share less and less with others. So as it becomes more personalized, there's less shared. And this is represented in the larger scale data as well. So as people are expressing and kind of constructing their own spiritual lives, as we're seeing that increase in disaffiliation, we're also seeing increasing rates of loneliness and social isolation. Now, it's somewhat too early to say exactly how the pandemic has accelerated that, or whether the pandemic will issue a real desire to return to in-person community. My sense is unfortunately, it will just exacerbate the trends that we already saw. But there is a real convergence around this theme of unbundling from traditions and different offerings, personalizing it for myself, and remixing different pieces together. So if that's the cultural waters that we're swimming in, and institutions are built mostly to maintain or to serve a specific perspective or a specific set of practices and traditions, we're seeing this encounter, or a little bit of this clash between what institutions are set up to do and what the cultural zeitgeist is. Does that make sense so far? I'm just going to look at all of your heads. I'm seeing lots of nodding. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michelle. And if not, I look forward to hearing your questions and reflections. But hopefully, this feels recognizable. Now, here's the thing that gets me really excited. This is not a foreign world, right? There are successful Jewish players in this space. And Tova, I think you're going to share a couple of links just in case these are organizations that are unfamiliar to you. But of course, right, we have Jewish organizations that have said, we are going to do one thing and we're going to do it really, really well. One Table is all in on Shabbat, right? Svara is all in on text study with a progressive kind of queer affirming lens. Immerse NYC says, like so many others, right, ritual bathing, the mikveh is the thing we're going to double down on. And so what you can see these organizations doing is responding to this cultural moment of, instead of saying we're going to do everything, we're going to try and serve all of the different elements, all the bundled pieces of the best of Judaism, we're going to say we're going to do one thing and we're going to do it really, really well. So I'd love to hear in the chat, what are some other organizations that you've seen that are doing this kind of work, that have picked one thing from the Jewish tradition and said, this is what I'm doubling down on? And I've cheekily included here the podcast that I co-hosted called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, where although we read Harry Potter as if it was scripture, we were using Jewish and Christian reading practices to help us have those kind of conversations. So we were doing Havruta, we were doing Pardes. And so you had all of these, also interesting to me, non-Jewish people absolutely loving doing Pardes, or at least a version of it in the way that we did it. And we always had teachers from the traditions come and instruct us on how to do it. So I love this. We've got a couple of examples here. The day of unplugging, yes, Ani, exactly. Really leaning into that big moment of stepping away from the tools of our technology. I see PJ Library lifted up a number of times here. Absolutely, really focusing. The Shemitah project, beautiful, Amy. So you can see how this allows people to personalize and to mix together this particular element of Jewish life that really speaks to them. Again, I want to acknowledge the loss of that, but I think each of these examples is speaking to the cultural zeitgeist in a way that is exciting. And this is why young people are drowning in content. There is so much content out there. And as we have remixed and personalized and unbundled, what we really need are containers that hold relationships together. This is my hope that I can double down in this session on, is that I believe the most valuable thing that religious educators can do today is to create small groups of mutual accompaniment and learning to navigate all of the content that's already out there. We don't need another beautiful essay or another fabulous podcast or another wonderful whatever it is of the great content that we all can create. What we need are people who hold relationships. This is why I love things like Havruta, because it's in the tradition. Here's the structure that we can use. Yes, Audrey, exactly, small group learning circles. And I think it's the creation of the containers that we will tap into this moment most effectively with. Now, here's the challenge. You don't get people to assent to being in a container unless they trust the kind of content that you're going to be exploring. So I'm not saying that there's no need for any new content. I'm saying the content is the tool to bring people in, and then the rich relationships and the experience of being held in relationship is what keeps them there. So getting people into structures of relationship. Oh, great shout out, Debbie. Yes, Gather DC has done this relational work so well. And this is my joy, is that there are so many organizations that are really doing this. And it's understanding why it's working that for me is really crucial. Here is my final little piece that gets me excited. We are entering into a new technological era where tools for this kind of small group holding are much more possible than they ever used to be. We are here on Zoom, which is decent, but not thrilling. Let's be honest. Who needed another Zoom? Not me. And it's in part because it kind of mirrors how much of social media works, right? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of these are open social network platforms where if I can follow you, I can see what you post. What we're seeing now is a new generation of digital tools that are designed to create that sense of intimacy and kind of small group accompaniment. And I want to tell you about a couple of them that I get really excited about. So the first one that you may all be familiar with is Discord. This started out as a gaming collaborative platform. So if you have young people in your household who like to play all sorts of games, and I see some nodding, they may be using Discord to great effect already, right? You can play shoot 'em up games and talk to each other at the same time. You can play all sorts of different types of games. And essentially, you have a personal server that you invite your friends to. And so there is a bounded sense of an us that shares this digital space over time. It has the usual chat rooms. It uses a lot of audio, just like Clubhouse did, for those of you engaged with that last year. But essentially, it's the kind of prototypical closed digital community. You have others out there like Heartbeat and Circle. And Tova, if you haven't already, please do post the links to these. Halo is another one. Mighty Networks is another one. My very favorite, if I was going to recommend one to check out, is the logo here in the bottom left of a tool called Geneva. And if you go to geneva.com, what you can do essentially is create your own, they call it a digital home or a cozy corner of the internet. This is the place where a group of people who share something, and it could even be a family. You have families signing up together but most likely it's going to be a group of friends or a group of people who share something, who want to accompany one another over time, that this is a space where life can happen. This is not to say that all of life happens only digitally. It's a tool that complements the physical, the real social reality that people experience, right? So it's like a friend's a chat in a text message thread, but it allows you a multiplicity of ways of engaging, both chat, audio, and video. And essentially what I think these new tools allow us to do is to mirror the kind of close small group experience that we love in person digitally, and it allows for the weaving of those two together. So what I hope we will see in the future, and what I think we are seeing, is content that is often centralized, right? From the very best content creators out there, the most high quality videos, the very best podcasts, the most wonderful writers. They are putting their stuff out into the world, and you have these small groups that use that content and make meaning of it and are in a relationship together and accompany one another as they encounter that content. So it changes the scale at which we're bundling. Rather than bundling a whole group of services into a single congregation or into one large organization, I think you're seeing specialized kind of content creation. And by content, I really mean everything from like one table to Headspace, right? So all sorts of different types of content. So you get the very best in that particular category. And then you get people choosing what that is with a small group of other people who want to do the same kind of thing. I love this, Lenny. Thank you. Lost Tribe has a Discord of over 3,000 Jewish teens and growing every day. So you can already see some of the places in which our friends and partners are doing this kind of work. Okay, so take homes. We're living in an age of unbundling and remixing. That is challenging some of the established ways in which institutions are designed to work. You have leaders in the field who have unbundled a specific piece of Jewish wisdom or practice or community. And you have new digital tools that allow us to integrate those experiences and make them social with the people we care about most. What we're going to do in just a moment is Joe is going to lead us into small groups. And I want you to reflect on these questions. The first one is, what does unbundling and remixing look like in your context? Do you recognize this with the people that you serve, the young people that you work with, the organizational context that you navigate? What does this look like in your context? And then secondly, from your perspective, what might that mean for the future of Jewish education? Are there assumptions that we maybe need to let go of? What are they? Are there new opportunities that you see that you want to try out? What might this mean for the future of Jewish education? So we will take 20 minutes for these small group breakouts. We'll come back and have some rigorous conversation where I expect at least a few stimulating challenges and then lots of motivating ideas that we'll get to share with each other. So there are the questions in the chat. What does unbundling and remixing look like in your context? And what might that mean for the future of Jewish education? So I will see, other than answering them. So what we're going to do now is have time for conversation. What we'll do is, there are a lot of people on the call, so we're going to use the chat box as the main place for you to add questions. So please start typing them now. You can add reflections in there as well. And if you want to ask a question that you want to be anonymous, please privately message Samantha, whose name you will find in the top left corner of your screen if you are looking on gallery view. I know questions in this context are not always ones that are able to be public. So I'd love to hear your reflections. What are the questions that come up? It might be on the kind of analysis level, it might be a tactical level, or it might be something in terms of what you recognize in terms of your own experience and context. So please type them into the chat and we'll go from there.
Casper, we are jumping right in because we don't have a shy group here, and that's what we love.
Yeah.
So courtesy of Betsy Stone, what is the function of legacy institutions in the world that unbundles?
Yes, Betsy, great question. Well, there's two answers to that question: what happens and what could happen. And let me say this before I say anything else. The Jewish world is so ahead of its peers in the United States. I always say to Jewish groups when I work with them, it's like, be happy that you're in a Jewish context. For all its challenges, you don't want to be in a Christian context right now, because in the Christian world, there is an assumption of kind of an everlasting supremacy that is now crumbling, and Christian institutions are really at a loss of what to do about that. Just look at the Methodist split a few days ago as another example of it. So let's start by being grateful for where we are. From there, what is the role of legacy institutions? I think it's extremely difficult to innovate within an institution that has built a set of rules and processes that is built for one world. And to try and create a different kind of ecosystem within that is not an easy task. There are some really interesting examples in the kind of innovation literature, like the University of Southern New Hampshire, which, you know, was a middling kind of C-level school, but now has become an absolute juggernaut in online education. And the way in which they enabled that was to allow the team that was building the online education offering, they literally have a different office, a different set of financial rules, a different set of organizational principles. And they basically created an island where a totally different set of rules applied. Now, in one way, that was awesome because they grew this enormous online education offering. The downside is that now you have these two institutions that are supposedly one, but absolutely do not connect to each other. And they have a lot of problems integrating the two. So that's one option, is create a different playground where people can have different rules and innovate. The thing that I get most excited about is when legacy institution leaders look for partners who are already thriving or who are trying new things in this new world and find ways in which they can be of service. If you're familiar with the two loops model for system change, that's something I really love to point to. And I will go hunting for that little video, or perhaps one of our team can do that, from the Bakana Institute. And essentially what it illustrates is how systems change and what roles one can play in that process of changing systems. One of the roles is to start out and be an innovator, to do something completely different that doesn't make sense in the current paradigm. Another role is to be within the existing paradigm, but to share resources, money, authority, political space, literally meeting rooms, 501c3 status, like all of the things that legacy institutions have that can shield and protect and encourage those innovators. A third role is to connect those innovators together, to help them see how they're part of a larger movement and feel more like they're not a standalone wild card, but they're part of a movement of newness. And finally, and I think this is something we don't talk about enough, is the role of hospice, of helping legacy institutions end their particular practice with dignity, without seeing it as a failure or a falling short, without letting the kind of bitterness that can be there drip into the rest of the ecosystem. So helping things close with dignity, I think, is also a really beautiful piece of work to do. That was more than you probably wanted to hear. And I see all sorts of other questions, which I trust Samantha will have thought through which one to ask.
Awesome. I am really excited about this question coming from Debbie Cooper. How might we push back against unbundling culture? Not necessarily putting our heads in the sand and not being unresponsive to the current zeitgeist, but holding on to some of the value that's created when bundling happens.
Yeah, that's a great question,
Powerful
Debbie.
question.
Yeah. Listen, this new world that I'm pointing to is not going to be for everyone. I definitely believe in a sort of mixed spiritual ecology. We're going to have some congregations that continue to survive and thrive. We're going to have some incredible digital offerings. We're going to have some things that are place-based and periodical, all sorts of different ways in which things are organized. There's not going to be one model that works for everyone. And so choosing to stick to the thing that we do is absolutely an option. I think as long as we understand that it is not going to grow. I don't think it's going to have a resonance into the kind of archetype of people who are in this new world. So let me start with that. I think that's totally a valid option. I think it's really difficult to push back against the DNA of how people want to engage with the world. You know, we read the Amazon customer reviews more than we read the expert reviews when we're buying something online. because we have just grown up, at least this generation, of trusting the wisdom of crowds, of looking at what peers are doing, of crowdsourcing, of understanding hierarchy and authority to come from the group, not from expertise. Now that leads to real challenges in terms of like vaccine misinformation, for example. So again, I'm not saying this is better, but I am saying this is what's real. And so to try and push back against that kind of tidal wave of culture is incredibly difficult to do. It will work for some people, but I think small islands rather than kind of mainstream culture.
Thank you. Our next question, how can we unbundle and still ensure that we value connecting with the diversity of both Jewish life and of opinions? Essentially, how do we foster interconnection rather than silos when we engage in unbundling?
Yeah, this is huge, right? Because one of the things that happens in congregational life is we encounter people that we wouldn't necessarily choose to encounter. And the more that we personalize, the more that we end up choosing, whether it's an echo chamber or whether, you know, it's the people that we already feel comfortable with, or that's absolutely the case. And that happens very, very quickly. So I think this is where thinking about the use of time is a way in which we can help people withstand discomfort. So one of the design principles for bringing people together is like, if you say you're going to hold your breath for 30 seconds, you'll say like, okay, I haven't done that in a long time, but I think I can try. If I'm going to ask you to do it for like 3 hours, no way you're going to do it. So I think the same is true as we think about designing for discomfort, is what is a thing people can say yes to. So if we're putting people, if we're asking them to risk something or to step out of their comfort zone, give it a time limitation so that folks know how long they have to endure it. Now, the beautiful thing is that once people have endured it for a little bit, very often there's a sense of like, wow, this was super meaningful and I loved it. And actually it helped me to grow. I'm willing to say yes again for the next chapter. And so I think one of the ways in which designing for kind of religious community in this moment that I try and think about is think about seasons or think about chapters, or give a time limitation, which allows people to withstand discomfort.
Thank you.
These are great questions, everyone.
These are great questions. I'm loving all of them. I'm seeing a few different questions, both in the chat and being sent to me, that seem to be a little bit more on the technical end of things. We have the question of, we understand how unbundling is important, but in this unbundled world, what role does a traditional religious school education then have? How do kids learn the basics? What happens to all of the real estate? I think it's really interesting that we're very much speaking to a group of people right now who are largely part of these institutional spaces, and we have responsibilities and we have technical things that we are overseeing, both in terms of tangible and amorphous. And how do we put all of that into this context of unbundling? Yeah.
I think everyone who faces this question, we all have to get really clear about what is the actual purpose of our work. Because the way we think, I mean, this is the classic start with why, but it is so easy to fall into assumptions of like, well, of course we need to do you know, this education program, or of course we need the place that we meet, because that's how we do it. And if that is the kind of set of base assumptions that we work with without questioning, I think very quickly we end up designing exactly the same thing that we've always done. And so that's a good internal measure of like, having gone through this whole innovation process, have we essentially landed with the same kind of things that we always do? Maybe we didn't question ourselves rigorously enough. So I would start to play with, without making a decision straight away, what if we didn't use this building? How would we do it? Or what if we canceled this program? How we do? And I'm going to really push the boundaries here. Like, what if it wasn't necessary for people to learn X part of the curriculum? What would we do then? What if they didn't do A, B, and C? I can't speak to specifics too well in this context, but question some of the kind of sacred cows, right, is the phrase. Not that you're making that decision, but just play around with how would you try and build what you care about most if you weren't allowed to do this. And what is striking is that often you end up realizing that, there is a loss, but it isn't actually fundamental. So for example, if, you know, again, I'll use the podcast as an example just because it's such a concrete one. You know, if someone had said, I am passionate about text study, I am deeply committed to building partners who travel through time together, reading text, making meaning, shaping their experience of their life through the practice of Haruta, you know, and I had said, well, what if we take away the Torah? That would have been a very, very painful moment for people to engage with. And yet there are tens of thousands of people who have now fallen in love with text study. And by the way, have ended up going to rabbinical school and joining synagogues because they participated in this podcast. And so it is also really crucial to remember that whatever it is that we're building now is not going to be the destination that keeps people forever, right? Our spiritual religious lives are always evolving, always changing, and so will the institutions that serve them. And to assume a sort of kind of static, singular way in which that happens, I think it misunderstands the broader ecosystem of which we're a part. So try and find ways to design something that questions some of the sacred cows. Try it in a small way, right? This is all about that work of trying something at a small scale, see what resonates, what doesn't, and then try again. But allow that kind of culture of questioning core assumptions, because I think without it, we end up doing things that are very similar to what we've always done.
I really appreciate you acknowledging that there's loss that comes with this process, and that for many of us, you know, things that we're used to, things that we love may be the things that eventually either have to or we choose to have fall by the wayside. And I think that's something that we'll all sit with as we contemplate this process. The next question I'm going to pose, I'm viewing through the lens of Jewish peoplehood. So in one of the breakout groups, attention was named between the way that people experience community in the micro, meaning locally,
yes,
and through the venues and forums they trust or have relationships with, and the commitment that many leaders and our institutions have to a larger collective. So the question then becomes, how can we help people feel invested in the larger whole? Should that be our goal? And the addition that I would put towards it, particularly for so many of us who are working with Gen Zers and beyond, they see themselves as universalists. But the particularism of feeling connected to the Jewish community as something unique and different and special, we have to teach that for many of them. It's not necessarily inherent. So how, as we're having this conversation about being invested in the micro and this macro meta, how do we balance all of that in our goal setting?
Oh, gosh, I wish I could hear from everyone on these questions, and it's just so stimulating. You know, I love the kind of principle of fractals, and I think Adrienne Marie Brown in her work has been really exceptional in explaining that. So I think the way in which you approach the micro is also the way in which you approach the macro, and vice versa. So the way in which we tell a story of multiplicity and universalism, I think, is as true when we're talking about a specific Jewish identity, right? What counts as Jewish? Who decides what the boundaries are and what Jewish belonging is? Right? Those same principles apply when you're talking about, you know, the worth and value and dignity of all human beings, of all living things. So I think that one way in which we maybe overcomplicate that is to separate those things too quickly. But I think this is where, again, the personalization and the unbundling becomes really powerful, because when you listen to one person's story, even if they have always ventured within the Jewish world, they have not lived in the same institutional affiliation context for the entirety of their lives. They've moved, they might have married, they might have changed their interests or practices. Like, there is a fullness and a diversity within even a single life that sometimes gets made invisible when we put these labels on them that make them feel static. And I think as much as you can help any young person recognize the meandering nature of even the most orthodox person, that will help situate their own experience of change within something that feels safer, rather than like it's straying beyond the boundaries. And so I think the more we can make space for the complexity of each individual story, the less it feels like, oh, this is an inside and that's an outside. It's like, no, we're all navigating this playground of life and religious tradition as best we can. That was maybe too much metaphor, Samantha. You tell me.
I'm enjoying it. I hope everyone else is as well. And given I'm seeing active nods, so I feel like we're not alone in this. I'm gonna once again bundle. So going against the grain here, a few questions together to make sure that we're able to include as many as possible. We have a few different questions about essentially how do we do this. So one is, how do we help more organizations see success as about more than just their own institution? The example being, it's not all about getting a teen to join my youth group, but to get them involved in the Jewish community as a whole. And then the other point that I'm seeing as related is, as educators and as nonprofits, we have a lot of people who we are responsive to in terms of our funders, our families, our members, whomever it might be. So when we go through unbundling, what happens if we say, again, we want to send to the world, and people are saying, that's not enough, you need to be doing more as your individual organization. So I'm seeing this as a point counterpoint question.
I feel you. I recognize it. It is not easy. Often in this situation, what you're dealing with is two different paradigms, right? Whether it's the funders or the existing people that you're serving, they really fit into what the current offering is. That's why they're there. That's why they like it. That's why they're happy. And so you have to do this kind of Southern New Hampshire University situation where there's this constituency, and then there's this constituency which doesn't yet have representation in the conversation that you're having. And so the first thing that I would recommend, and this is why I loved Rabbi Wallach's note here in the chat, is to change the conversation, you have to change who's in the conversation. And if we only talk to our existing members and the people who already fund us, we're going to end up in the same set of outcomes and goals and metrics and programs. So the first thing you have to do is exactly go out, schmooze at the sports league, like go meet people, go have coffee with folks, go and not with immediately the questions of like, why don't you like being part of the Jewish community or whatever it is, but like ask them about their life. What brings them joy? What brings them sorrow? What's hard for them right now? What are the things that they need? What do they long for? Just have, even just 20 of those conversations with people in the local community, and you will immediately spot patterns and have ideas, because you're very, very good at what you do. You're going to think about, well, hey, I know something that'll help with that. And so as you start to hear about the felt needs of the people around you, and you start to imagine what potential offerings could be that would meet those needs, you have a new constituency with which to balance against the current organizational constituency that's already in place. Now, the more you can bring those funders with you on that learning journey, the more that you can help people see that this is not just a case of mission creep or whatever it is, but it's actually responding to a group of people who are underserved. Because this is the thing, in this unbundled world, yes, people have personalized and have found things that are specifically true to them, but they are not actually fulfilled, right? There is a lot that's missing when you speak to people. Here are two themes that I've heard just in the last few months as I've been doing some kind of customer research interviews. One is that people feel like they are scatteredly seeking, right? They're putting together their own mix of things that are right for them, but they kind of feel like they're making it up and they don't really know if it amounts to anything. So it feels good for me, this personalized mix, but is it legit? So they're feeling very scattered in their own personalization. So can you help people feel coherent? Can you help people feel confident in what it is that their own mix is, right? You're not going to get them to agree to the exact prescribed diet that existed before, but what you can help them do is narrate their experience of make sense of what is happening in their life. So that's one felt need that I've heard. And the other one is as old as time, is the longing for belonging. People feel disconnected, so help them feel connected. It's such an obvious one, but it is absolutely huge. So are there people who have shared similar experiences? Are there people who want to talk about the same things that they're passionate about? Basic stuff. But if you can create a constituency of members or users or people that you serve that counterbalance the existing forces, that's the best way to shift some of those conversations.
Amazing. So thanks to the breadth of our Zoom room, we have people here who are coming from all sorts of different organizations, some that are national, legacy institutions, and others that really work in these micro spaces and smaller communities or as sole practitioners. So this question came earlier in response to the stat that you shared at the very beginning about the New York Times and the media, and how the Times in this world of unbundling is still more successful than ever before. But then the counterpoint came, well, what about local media?
Yes.
So how do we, in this world of unbundling, we have national Jewish organizations here, and we have these micro communities that are connecting on that very local level. What's the difference in how we should all be operating, and how do we balance accordingly?
I love it. Yes. So the Times went through this crash and then this resurgence as it figured out its online subscriptions. If a local newspaper tries to compete with the Times on content creation, it's going to fail. When you know, the big national organizations that are on this call, like, hooray for you, great. You are going to provide the best kind of materials, curriculums, content, video, all of the stuff, like, because you've got the resources, right? This is what happened online as well. The people started drifting from their local congregation to the ones that had the best preaching or the best online experience, because that's what we're looking for. So the job of the local then becomes very different. It's not about providing content, it's about creating experiences of community, right? That's the thing that you can do at the local level that those big players cannot do effectively. So you can even use their content, like go for it. But that's what the best local news does, is the new kind of tide of nonprofits, and Vermont has a great example of a nonprofit. So it's also structurally different, right? It's not trying to be a news organization in a traditional company structure. It's a local nonprofit, and it's all about engaging people in user-generated content, in creating experiences of belonging through local news. And so people feel connected to place and community in a very, very different way from what you do as a subscriber to the Times. So think about it as playing a different game. If you're at that local level, if you don't have the same number of resources, what you have is proximity, authenticity, and the potential to build trust with the local community that the national level simply cannot do. Please don't create another curriculum. That's not what we need.
This question I love that just came up in the chat. So I am actually going to read it verbatim, and thank you to Rabbi Jesse. I think the question is about then what? How do you integrate what you learn on the soccer field or in the coffee shop with the offerings from whatever structures and frameworks we're educating within? I think that often we silo these two practices, and that perpetuates the dichotomy. Thinking about a mixtape, when we unbundle the music from the album, many of us create a new set list that has a new theme or a centering idea.
Jesse.
Are we doing that when we meet people and ask them what they need, with how we adjust to what we are actually offering?
Okay, there's so much in here. I love this. Okay, and I should have said Rabbi Dressen, forgive me. I think the mixtape is a really beautiful direction to go, but I would look at the economics of the music industry. So, you know, as everyone knows, the number of plays you need on Spotify to make a living is an obscenely large amount, because the unit economics are no longer the same as buying a CD for whatever it was, $12.99, right? The place where musicians now make money, if they do at all, is in live shows, right? The tickets for a live music experience have gone through the roof. So my question would be, in the then what, is you're not actually going to play the same game as you're used to, right? It's a different thing that you're entering in terms of where the value capture is, to be gross about it. So let's play around with that idea. Okay, so you go to the soccer field, you meet people, you ask them about their experience of life, the challenges they have, the joys that they want to share. And you might discover, for example, that people are actually really passionate about their well-being and mental health, or they're really struggling with what it means to have teenage kids, or they want to lose weight, or they want to get strong, or I don't know what it is. They're looking after a parent that needs a lot of care. What is the thing that would help give an experience to them that would help them with that need? And this, for me, becomes really creative, because this is where I get passionate about the question of what counts as Jewish. I think if you, and Rabbi Ilan Babchuk was the first person who really got me thinking about this. You know, he has a team of friends. I think it's a group, one of these obstacle courses every year in the kind of muddy landscape of Vermont in the summer. And it's like this horrific 4-hour obstacle course. And you have to run up over things and under things and all this stuff. And that team is called Mountain Juice, which I just love, a bunch of Jewish guys. And I asked him, like, is that a Jewish practice for you? And he was like, you know what? Yes, I think it's part of my Jewish life. And what it did was it connected him with old friends from college who he doesn't really speak to much through the rest of the year. It helps him remember the good times of his young adulthood. And it creates an incentive for his physical workouts during the year because he wants to be in good enough shape to participate in this thing. So for me, that's a really interesting example of someone who had enough skill to be like, huh, here is something I want to do. Here's a group of people that I know I can do it with. What if this is now part of my Jewish life? And so that, for me, that's the answer to the question of what then is like, there are 100 different answers to that question, but it doesn't look like the kind of Jewish activities necessarily that we're used to providing. So that's where the creativity comes in. So the mixtape is awesome, but no one's making money from mixtapes, concert, or the merch, right? Or the whatever it is, or the brand partnerships. Like, just let yourself kind of think as broadly and as creatively as you can.
I love that. I do think of myself as very Jewishly open-minded. I will say you will never find me on an obstacle course as a personal choice, but I respect those for whom that is a meaningful Jewish experience. I'm heartbroken to be closing the Q&A portion. There are so many questions that I hope everyone's appreciating the chat as its own text space, as its own living page, as much as I am, because there are so many insights being shared here and questions, and we're excited to continue those conversations. I just want to make a few comments, and then Casper, I'll turn it over to you for your close. My first one, of course, goes without saying, is thank you. Thank you to everyone who is here. Casper, for your insights, to the entire Jewish Education Project staff, especially those who have been monitoring the chat, monitoring the breakouts, and making all of this possible. And to everyone who contributed, if you asked a question, if you participated in your breakout room, by your presence being here, we appreciate you creating this space and this community with us. One of the things that I regularly say when I'm in environments with learners is my biggest sadness coming out of this space would be if we came away and someone said, this was enough, I got this, now I understand unbundling, I'm pretty much good to go, and I'm gonna go take the world by storm. I hope, of course, that we all will, but really I hope that this triggered a conversation that will continue, that we won't leave satisfied, but we'll leave with these lingering questions, wanting this community to continue and really exploring how we can take this forward. And luckily, I'm here to tell you about ways to do that. First up, in a few minutes, you will all be getting a survey in your inboxes. I'm seeing comments in the chat now about next steps that people are hoping for. This is your chance to let us know about all of your wants, all of your questions, all of your feedback, and we're excited to explore how the Jewish Education Project can enable the continuation of this conversation. We will also be hosting a podcast, taking our inspiration from Casper. For those who are not yet subscribed to the Adapting feed, you will be receiving a link in order to do so. And we'll be having several episodes over the next few months, focusing specifically on continuing this conversation and envisioning the Jewish future. And we're super excited about that. And the final note that I want to make is several of you, many of you, have signed up for our networking time after this. We know that there's a difference, of course, between Zoom and in person. We hope that we've been able to make this accessible to people who wouldn't have been able to come to an in-person event, but there's also something missing when we're not having those hallway conversations, elevator conversations that really move us in our work and give us a chance to build relationships with each other. So whether or not you have signed up, feel free to stay on for the networking portion, which will commence at 1:30 and change as soon as we have wrapped up and given everyone a chance for a bio break, if that is something you are craving at this moment. But once again, thank you all, and Casper, I will turn it back to you for your close.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Yeah, huge thanks to you and Tova and Joe and the whole team for putting this together. And just a shout out really to each and every one of you for grappling with these questions. I get to have the easy job of being like, hey, look at this. Isn't this interesting? What does it mean? And now I'm like, you guys figure it out. And so I just know I'm in it with you, and that again, I really stress there's not like one model that one person's going to discover that's going to work for everything. It's going to take all of us being creative in the context and the relationships which we have to figure out what works for the people that we love and that we serve. So please try. That's the main thing that I ask. Let's not hold back. Let's be willing to risk something that we haven't tried before, and to learn something from it. There's no looking stupid when no one knows the answer. So keep going, and thank you very, very much for your time and attention today. Be well.
So once again, please, thank you again. If you're planning on staying on for the networking, we're using the same Zoom room. You can either mute yourselves, turn off your cameras for the moment, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Otherwise, feel free to leave and come back. And if you're wrapping up your time with us today, thank you. And we look forward to more opportunities to continue the conversation in the future.